we would certainly, as a world, be better off if we had, say, half as many people.
It's simplistic to say that X number of people is too much for the planet. Historically, it's quite clear that what X is has changed over time.
We see life support systems breaking down even with 5 billion people.
There is no physical limit in the long run on the number of people that this planet can support.
Our impact on the Earth depends on two things: how much we individually consume and how many consumers there are.
We are now consuming the Earth's resources faster than ever before.
Let's look now at what happens when we have this kind of steady growth in a finite environment. Bacteria grow by doubling, and one bacterium divides to become 2, the 2 divide to become 4, the 4 become 8, 16, and so on. Suppose we had bacteria that doubled in number this way every minute. Suppose we put one of these bacteria in an empty bottle at 11 in the morning and then observe that the bottle's full at 12 noon. Now there's our case of just ordinary, steady growth. It has a doubling time of 1 minute. It's in the finite environment of one bottle. I want to ask you 3 questions. Number 1, at what time was the bottle half full? Would you believe 11:59, 1 minute before 12, because they double in number every minute? And the second question, if you were an average bacterium in that bottle, at what time would you first realize that you were running out of space? Now think about this. This kind of steady growth is the centerpiece of the national economy and of the entire global economy. Think about it. Well, let's just look at the last minutes in the bottle. At 12 noon it's full, 1 minute before it's half full, 2 minutes before it's a quarter full, then an eighth and a 16th. Let me ask you, at 5 minutes before 12, when the bottle's only 3% full and is 97% open space just yearning for development, how many of you would realize there was a problem? Now, in the ongoing controversy over growth in Boulder, someone wrote to the newspaper some years ago and said, look, there isn't any problem with population growth in Boulder because, the writer said, we have 15 times as much open space as we've already used. So let me ask you, what time was it in Boulder when the open space was 15 times the amount of space we'd already used? And the answer is it was 4 minutes before 12 in Boulder Valley. Well, suppose that at 2 minutes before 12, some of the bacteria realize that they're running out of space, so they launch a great search for new bottles. And they search offshore, on the outer continental shelf, in the overthrust belt, and in the Arctic. And they find 3 new bottles. Now that is a colossal discovery. That discovery is 3 times the amount of resource they ever knew about before. They now have 4 bottles. Before the discovery there was only 1. Now surely this will give them a sustainable society, won't it? Well, you know what the third question is. How long can the growth continue as a result of this magnificent discovery? Well, let's look at the score. At 12 noon, 1 bottle's filled, there are 3 to go. 12:01, 2 bottles are filled, there are 2 to go. And at 12:02, all 4 are filled, and that's the end of the line. Now, you don't need any more arithmetic than this to evaluate the absolutely contradictory statements we've all heard and read from experts who tell us in one breath we can go on increasing our rates of consumption of fossil fuels. In the next breath they say, but don't worry, we'll always be able to make the discoveries of new resources that we need to meet the requirements of that growth. Now, chief among these optimists was the late Dr. Julian Simon, formerly professor of economics and business administration at the University of Illinois and later at the University of Maryland. Simon had a book that was published by the Princeton University Press, and in that book he's writing about oil from many sources, including biomass, and he says clearly, there's no meaningful limit to this source except for the sun's energy. He goes on to note, but even if our sun were not so vast as it is, there may well be other suns elsewhere. Now don't laugh. For decades before his death, this man was a trusted policy advisor at the very highest levels in Washington, D.C. Here's a quotation from one of his strong supporters. There was a UN report that talked about the possibility of resource collapse because of population growth, and when asked about the report, HUD Secretary Jack Kemp said, "Nonsense, people are not a drain on the resources of the planet." Malcolm Forbes Jr., editor-in-chief of Forbes magazine, tells us in an editorial that CNN recently ran a silly series purporting to show that the world's in mortal danger because there are too many of us. In the poorer countries, the many mouths mean poverty, and richer countries are wrecking the Earth's atmosphere with pollution. It's all nonsense. Political leaders say, oh, we can have our growth, we'll call it smart growth, and smart growth will save the environment. Well, we need to know about smart growth. Smart growth destroys the environment. Dumb growth destroys the environment. Now, smart growth just destroys the environment with good taste. So it's a little like buying a ticket on the Titanic. If you're smart, you go first class. If you're dumb, you go steerage, but the result's the same. But you hear all sorts of well-meaning people pointing to distant underdeveloped nations and saying they're the problem with overpopulation. The average person in the United States in a lifetime will consume something like maybe 30 times the amount of resources that'll be consumed by a person in a lifetime in an underdeveloped nation. We are the problem. We have the responsibility, and we have the authority to deal with the problem here as a domestic problem in the United States. We have sent representatives to international conferences to tell the underdeveloped nations, you're the problem, you've got to stop your population growth. And they just laugh and say, look, you're the problem with all of your high per capita consumption. Now, except for the petroleum graphs, the things I tell you are not predictions of the future. I'm only reporting facts and the results of some very simple arithmetic. But I do this with confidence that these facts, this arithmetic, and more important, our level of understanding of them will play a major role in shaping our future. Now, don't take what I've said blindly or uncritically because of the rhetoric or for any other reason. Please, you check the facts. Please check my arithmetic. If you find errors, please let me know. But if you don't find errors, then I hope you'll take this very, very seriously. You are important people. You can think. And if there was ever a time when the human race needs people who will think, it's right now. It's our responsibility as citizens in a democracy to think. We should remember the words of Aldous Huxley. He observed that facts do not cease to exist because they're ignored. And we should remember H.L. Mencken's social philosophy. He believed that it was in the nature of the human species to reject what is true but unpleasant and to embrace what is obviously false but comforting.
that is perfectly flat. Flat.